Hello, everybody. Susan Sweat. I'm at Cornerstone Government Affairs, your lobbyist for child help, and I've been working with you for several years. Hopefully, you're seeing a series of these videos where we're diving in a little bit deeper into what our legislative asks, our requests are going to be to members of Congress when we do our virtual meetings on the Hill. We're very excited to have you participating. It's a huge help. These are issues that we go in and talk about all day long with members and their staff, but when we have advocates from the district coming in and explaining in their personal story why these things matter to them, it really helps connect the dots for these members and gives a level of import to our ask that we can't just do as lobbyists up here all the time. So you really come alongside us and help us kind of double down on our messaging. And so we're really thankful to have you participating this year. So in this video, we're going to talk about CAPTA. CAPTA is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. Now, to step back and understand what that is and why we care about it, I want to tell you just a little bit about the congressional process. So we have two different flavors of bills, of legislation that you'll see moving through Congress. One are the appropriations bills that happen every year and set funding for different agencies. We have a video on that, on the requests that we have in the appropriations process. The other types of bills that you see moving through Congress are authorization bills. Those are bills that create or modify programs that the federal government implements. And so authorization bills happen, the majority of the bills in Congress are authorization bills, and they come out of the various committees that are in the House and the Senate that are arranged and organized around a specific issue. And so our issue that we care about is child welfare. And one of the important bills that is authorized at a regular basis every 5 years is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. Now, authorization bills can happen at different speeds. So some agencies in the federal government have an authorization bill that happens every year. Some have an authorization bill that moves through Congress every 5 years or 7 years, 4 years or 10 years. It really depends on how the first bill was drafted. So we're in a 5-year cycle. One of the interesting things about authorization bills is that while they can get bogged down in the process and delayed, as long as the appropriations bills with the money keeps funding those activities that the authorization bill sets policy for, the programs don't go away. So we worry when we lose an authorization and lose funding, the program will go away. But if the money keeps flowing, then the program will stay there. Where we have been challenged is that our National Child Abuse Hotline has never been authorized. So we would like to create legislation, create a piece of the US code that says the federal government should, in fact, have a program to support a national child abuse hotline. And so the way that we would create that piece of the code is by introducing legislation. So we have had legislation introduced in the House and in the Senate to authorize the National Child Abuse Hotline. Those bills have been incorporated into a larger bill, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act reauthorization. So this larger bill, has a whole host of activities and programs that are happening right now in the federal government, and this is their underlying statutory authorization for the federal government to be conducting that activity. We are trying to tack on to all these other child abuse authorizations and get an authorization for the National Child Abuse Hotline. Well, why does that matter? I just talked about how there's appropriations bills and they're the ones that fund the government. And as long as you have money flowing, who cares if you have an authorization? Well, in certain instances, it actually does matter if you don't have an authorization, you're at a disadvantage. And we started working on an authorization, a statutory authorization for the National Child Abuse Hotline several years ago. And authorizations are multi-year process. Usually it takes somewhere between 2 and 5 or 6 years to get an authorization bill done and get your piece of the code established. So we started working on this several years ago, and what we ran into is the reason this matters is we have a great case study in why this matters, and our own experience with the hotline. So when COVID hit, our calls into the hotline started going up, and we realized very quickly in the first few weeks that we needed to add more additional funds to support the hotline so that we could do more outreach to kids as they are stuck at home with their abusers, so that we could put more bodies in the seats for our counselors and do that outreach and education and really beef up our hotline during this time. The bills that were being written by Congress to send money out to the agencies for COVID response were very, very short. They just, said, you have X number of dollars for this piece of the code. It didn't give any further detail around how to use those dollars. And because we didn't have a statutory piece of the law that said child abuse hotline in it, there was no place for them to dump that money. They could dump the money over into HHS generally, but HHS did not have to spend it on the hotline, and in fact had lots and lots of priorities. So it certainly wouldn't have gotten to us. And so without that code, they had no way to actually send us money. It was very frustrating, and this happened with a bunch of different programs. But I think we were one of the most glaring examples of a place where, without having a statutory authorization, we were not, the federal government was not able to respond by utilizing our services during a time of crisis. And so it's really important to have that statutory authorization. I kind of liken it to like having a bank account. So we had somebody willing to give us money, but we had no bank account for them to put it into. Now that's different than our appropriations process. If you'll recall, we are, we have a grant that we've been working under. And then we also are kind of just asking them to give us funding without an authorization. And that works in an annual appropriations process, but it doesn't work in emergency spending, which is where we were at the beginning of COVID when they had these emergency spending bills and we didn't have a way for them to put money into our bank account. So it's super important that we get this authorization. We've had a House, we've had a Senate bill. We are incorporated into the CAPTA reauthorization bill. We're very excited about that. We've had really good bipartisan support. Our House bill was introduced by Lucy McBath from Georgia and Elise Stefanik from New York, a Democrat from Georgia, a Republican from New York. Our Senate bill was introduced by Kirsten Sinema from Arizona and Susan Collins from Maine, a Democrat from Arizona, a Republican from Maine. And both committees have kind of welcomed us into these CAPTA reauthorization bills. Now the House has passed their bill and the Senate has theirs done at the committee level, but it hasn't gone to the Senate floor. And if you remember from your old social studies days, you know that we go through the subcommittee and then the full committee and then the floor in either chamber, and then they come together and negotiate a conference bill, a final bill that then moves to each chamber for an up or down vote and onto the president's desk. So we've gone through the House process. We're most of the way through the Senate process. And at this point, if they wanted to, they could bypass going to the Senate floor and just move straight into that conference negotiation, produce a final bill, and let's get that off to the president's desk. And that's what we want to encourage our members of the House and Senate to do. So your request is that they reach out to the two committees that are overseeing this CAPTA reauthorization and encourage them to finalize the CAPTA bill and get it signed into law before the end of this Congress. In the House, you're encouraging them to reach out to the Education and Labor Committee. And in the Senate, you're encouraging our senators to reach out to the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We call that the HELP Committee for short, HELP. So the HELP Committee or the Ed and Labor Committee are the two places where we're asking our members of Congress to just pick up the phone and give a call to the committee staff and say, we really want to see CAPTA get finalized and move forward. It includes authorization. for the National Child Abuse Hotline, and we need that authorization so that we have a statutory place to live in the code, and so that the federal government can utilize us in emergency situations like we just ran into. So that this asking them to reach out and move an authorization bill before the end of Congress is very normal language for them. They will understand what you're saying when you ask for that. And of course, we're going to be sending them information ahead of your meeting, so they'll have it written out for them. But your job is to be passionate, to explain why these child welfare issues matter to you, and the importance of our National Child Abuse Hotline, and just ask them if we could have them reach out to the Ed and Labor and Senate Help Committees and see if we can get that CAPTA bill finalized before the end of the Congress. So pretty easy ask from what a member of Congress would consider a pretty easy ask, but a really important one for us. So we really thank you all for giving your time to come do these meetings and make those requests. It certainly helps us move forward.